Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn, your host of Thanatology Themes. And today we are going to be discussing the role of the social worker. I'm going to share my screen so that we can go through things and that I don't miss anything. Okay. So I'm now a therapist in private practice, and I'm the founder and director of the Center for Integrated Grief and a fellow in thanatology. However, I was a hospice social worker for 8 years here in Brooklyn. I actually worked for one of the largest hospices in the country. At that time, we were the visiting nurses. So I was very proud to be part of the visiting nurse services. They've changed and new reiterations. Okay, so we're going to talk about the role of the hospice social worker. I know a lot of people don't even know what social workers do in general, let alone on a hospice team. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about are going to sound very familiar because now a lot of people these days are trying to do the role of the social worker. All right, so we're going to do a short recap of the history of hospice, okay? Dame Cicely Saunders, as she later was known, was Cicely Saunders after World War II. And she was what was called a lady almoner. That's eventually what the social work profession became. They started as lady almoners. So social work really came into it, became a thing after World War II. So she was a social worker. Then she became a nurse. Then she became a doctor. And in 1968, she opened the first hospice ever, St. Christopher's in London. What's so important is this interdisciplinary approach. You must have a whole team of people to serve someone who's dying. I do want to throw shade because I feel like nowadays there's a lot of people who are like, I do this, that, and the other. You don't. Because it takes a team of people who work together and we learn from each other and we help and support each other to serve a patient and their family. Okay, so this is really important, the interdisciplinary approach. A lot of people don't realize. So the nurse is the COC or coordinator of care, and the social worker are really your main core team in home hospice. Okay, doctor is important, but sometimes doesn't even see the person in person. Might just be over FaceTime. This is me doing FaceTime, or might visit one time. Now, the doctor, I always say the nurse and to some degree the social worker are the eyes and ears for the doctor. And when we do our interdisciplinary meeting every week, we go through all the patients. The doctor knows everything, sees the chart, is involved. However, it's the nurse and social worker who are in person in the home. Behind the scenes, there's the doctor, there's a nurse practitioner, there could be a wound care specialist, we have our team manager, and then sometimes we'll bring in if the family wants the spiritual care counselor. We in New York use that term. So most of the country, I think, uses the term chaplain. There's sometimes music therapists we can bring in, volunteers, and some other folks. But that's really the main team. Okay, so this is really important for people to know. And I just want to say quickly, the first hospice in the US was in 1974. The hospice Medicare benefit was passed in 1982. We have been doing this work for a long time, okay? Social workers have been doing this work for a long time in end-of-life care. There is a death system in this country, and there have been death workers for a long time. So it's really important we understand the history, okay? So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this slide. This is the biopsychosocial, spiritual, financial, okay? All social workers in social work school are trained to do a biopsychosocial, spiritual. In hospice, it's a financial. Okay, this is how we do our assessments. Social workers are put into many acute settings, people dying, mental health facilities, all kinds of things, right? The biopsychosocial, spiritual, financial is also, so we have the training in school, and the hospice Medicare benefit mandates that the social worker goes through all of this intake in order to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the patient and family. It is not a fly by the seat thing. It is not random. We're not just, oh, I asked someone a question. No, these are processes and procedures that are put in place and have been for 40 some years. Okay. So I think a lot of people don't really understand that there is a process and we have specific training for it. And I'm using my hand because we have a tablet, a little computer that we had to go through and answer all of these questions related to the biopsychosocial, spiritual, financial. Specifically, I want to say Social Work 101. We are taught that it is a conversation, not an interview. This is really important. I'm hearing a lot of people nowadays saying, like 10 things I learned from the dying, or I asked my dying patient that. I want to say, like, stop bothering dying people. So we have a conversation with people. A biopsychosocial, spiritual, financial is truly a holistic approach, a holistic understanding of the patient as a whole human being, the family as a whole human being, right? This is our ecological perspective, okay? And this is how you have a strengths-based perspective. Okay. And it's this back and forth conversation. We also build trust with people. Part of this conversation is about DNR, the MOST form, which the social worker does. I've done many. I'm going to talk about that. Funeral plans, end of life plans, goals, all of these, we call them goals of care, all of these kind of things. So this is a part of it. So we have the training of the biopsychosocial spiritual. All hospice workers go to an orientation when they get hot. Everybody, nurse, everybody does this whole week or 2 week training. And then the social worker has another specific training on the MOST form, DNR, healthcare proxy, all of these things. Okay. I tried to figure out, I have probably worked with almost 1,000 people through the end of their life. I've done probably almost 900 healthcare proxy forms, DNR forms, over 500 MOST forms. Okay. So we have these conversations and about funeral planning. Okay. So I'm going to go through the biopsychosocial, spiritual, financial. As I wrote, it is an evaluation of what is missing and how do we put a plan in place. I also want to say, and this is one of the things I say, there's the deeper work and the coping. Right. And we have to do both. If you're just doing coping, that becomes toxic positivity, right? We have to have the deeper work, the deeper understanding, and then do the coping. All right. So this is what that looks like. So everybody dies across a breadth of people. Okay. So if someone says like dying people want this, that's not true. Everybody's unique and different. Maybe that person works with a very small part of the population, but we have experience working with everybody. Okay. So bio is for biological. There are a small percentage of people that, due to their diagnosis, have very exacerbated symptoms. Some forms of cancer are particularly painful. There are certain COPD, perhaps, could have a lot of shortness of breath, right? At end of life, we do know sometimes there's some pain or there's sometimes shortness of breath, and we have symptom management, but these are folks who have experienced this for a long time from the beginning. It is very important to them and their families that they do not suffer. They want to know that while the most important thing is that they don't want to suffer, and their families want to know that they will not see them suffer. Okay. So the social worker then calls a family meeting, the deeper work. We're going to do a family meeting with the doctor, the nurse, maybe the nurse practitioner. Maybe we bring in, we have a specialist nurse, of course, the family, the caregiver, and then everyone on the team, the social worker, if the chaplain or spiritual care counselor, everybody. And we're all in the team meeting together. And we really talk specifically to address what is going on and how to help this person die comfortably. We can have this conversation, and to some degree we do with everybody, but these folks have had exacerbated symptoms, okay? So we do the deeper work, and then a couple of days later, the social worker follows up and does the coping. Social workers are therapists in training, okay? We've done 2 years of training. We understand human behavior, attachment theory, all of these kinds of things, okay? So, hey, I want to check in. How did you feel about the meeting? Did we address all your needs? Do you still have any feelings, any anxiety? How are you doing about it? So we've done the deeper work, and then we do the coping. And if we have to do another meeting, we can, or we can follow up. Okay, so that's the biological. Psycho is for psychological. So is there what we want to find out, is there a history of anxiety or depression for the patient or for the caregivers or the people involved? I've worked with veterans, I've worked with POWs, I've worked with all sorts of people who are both patients. And we had a client, lovely woman, her son, who was taking care of her, lived in the home, was a veteran, and he had PTSD. So all of these different, how does this play out? And it was actually hard for him to care for her. And so then we had to bring in certain support systems, right, to kind of help them, to scaffold people. So the psychological, I actually have worked, once we had a client who, a son, who actually got very angry and almost violent as his mom was dying. I don't know his diagnosis. I don't know what was going on. The nurse and I ended up leaving, and we actually felt unsafe. That doesn't happen very often, very, very uncommon. So obviously he must have had some sort of mental health diagnosis. This is not common, right? But there are psychological, whether it's the patient or the family. I worked with another caregiver, lovely, lovely patient. Her daughter lived with her. Okay, we came into the home. I could tell the daughter was very protective of mom. And then the daughter started getting really protective of the mom, not wanting to let the hospice team in, not wanting to give medication. The nurse was on vacation and would not allow a fill-in nurse to come in. So another family reached out to us, or maybe I found the other, I forget how it was, and said, I want you to know what happened. The daughter, 20 years ago, before, had been very high functioning, had a job, had a breakdown. I don't know exactly what that meant. Moved in with mom and had been dependent on mom since. And now mom was quickly deteriorating, and this was too much for this person. Okay. So, we had an idea we could see, but it was very helpful. Okay. I've also had patients who had borderline personality disorder. That's very difficult. Okay. We've had patients who are hoarders and going into their home. I also had a patient whose wife was a hoarder. So all of these different psychological, there's many, many, variations, because sadly everybody dies. And in the general population, this is what's happening. I will also say in my book that I wrote, the first chapter is a woman, young, hey, who was taking care of her father, who had physically abused their mother for like 50 years. I mean, years and years and years. And they were of that generation where mom didn't leave. The woman had a brother who wanted nothing to do with the dad and said to the sister, call me when he's dead. And when the brother had been a teenager, he would try to protect his mom, try to, fight the dad, loved mom and tried to protect her, right? So mom had already died. She had died like 5 or 7 years before, and he didn't want to have anything to do with the dad. And this woman was here taking care of her dad who had abused her mother. She felt some sort of duty or obligation, and it was very hard, and we really supported her through that. Okay. So psychological, a lot in that. Psychological is our intra, but it affects the inter, which is the social. right? So a lot of things with social. Certainly what support systems or lack of support systems, right? This is sometimes when we'll bring in certainly a volunteer um, or home care, which I talk about in another video. But social could also be, it's very hard for a young parent to be dying to be leaving behind young kids. Really hard, really, really hard. And I've done a lot of work with that. And I'm like about to get teary-eyed just talking about it and remembering some of those were really hard situations, some of my hardest situations. I also had pediatric patients. Really hard for a parent to watch a child die. So this is both intra, but there's also the social aspect, right? This is really how it's affecting other people. Social can also be, I've seen where someone has 4 kids, 4 adult children, and one tends to be a daughter is doing all the work, right? And then she's resentful, or there's family dynamics, that's social. A lot of that can be going on. Who's the healthcare proxy? Who's the power of attorney? Are they arguing over that? I will say once in a while, the parent doesn't really name the right kid the healthcare proxy or the power of attorney. I've seen this. I know of a case where the parent named one of the adult children the healthcare proxy who did not believe in giving medication. And the other siblings couldn't do anything about it. And the nurses even went up to the other siblings and were like, we cannot give medication. Can you do something? So who is the healthcare proxy? Who's the power of attorney? How are they all working together? So these are some things in the social, and a lot of things can affect that. I know another social worker was working with a young mom who was dying and had no one to take her kids. And the social worker was asking me and other social workers, and I'll talk more about this team approach, about foster care and how does that work? And is there a way to keep the kids out of the foster care system? So social is these can be very important for people to, so we need to know. So when we do our biopsychosocial, spiritual, financial, what is going on? What is missing? What are the strengths? What do they need? What is most important to them? What is causing them anxiety, depression, and fear? Right? Okay. So spiritual sometimes is the idea, it could be both existential. I have to come to terms with the fact that I'm dying. What does that mean? For some people, it could go into religion. What happens to my body, or what happens to my spirit, my soul? Is it religious, heaven, hell, or karma, reincarnation? So sometimes it's a conversation with the spiritual care counselor. People call the chaplain. Sometimes they just want to have a conversation with the social worker. Sometimes we'll bring in a rabbi or a priest or an imam or whoever is appropriate. And I want to go back to the psychosocial spiritual. As I had said with the bio, we do the deeper work and the coping, and it's the same with all of them. Is there a need? How do we meet it? Who are the people we need to bring in? Is it the foster care system, or is it something else? And then, of course, how is the person coping with, are we meeting the needs, right? And it's the same with all of those. Financial, I have worked with clients and other social workers as well who live in public housing or NYCHA housing. So it turned out that the person who was dying was the only person on the lease. And NYCHA housing is very punitive about this. Once the person dies, if no one else is on the lease, the family goes to a homeless shelter. I mean, they're homeless. So this means, well, I'll talk about this more later, but this means a social worker has to go advocate, right? So how do we remedy the situation? Sometimes it's about funeral plans. The person can't afford the funeral home or the funeral plans. So that piece is often a part of it too, of the financial. Sometimes that's part of the spiritual. I don't know what I want. I don't know, we kind of help people figure out, do they want to do a life celebration? one of the things, Amy Cunningham, who's amazing, I like to say I helped her start her career. So she was one of the first people to do not only life celebrations, but she did years ago an in-home yoga funeral for a family I knew who wanted like a yoga. I don't know if it's even a funeral. So she really does these personalized. She also worked, we've had a couple Tibetan families. She got I think she did a special certification, but she can keep the body in the home for like 3 to 5 days, and they have to use dry ice, and you have to do it under a funeral director's license. But in the Tibetan or Buddhist religion, this is what they do. So she helped people. So spiritually, this is what people wanted. This was part of their end of life. And then we bring in Amy Cunningham, right? So the social worker had the resources, has to kind of find the people who can help meet the needs. So our interdisciplinary team is certainly the hospice team, but it could be the world, right? This could be outside, whether it's Amy Cunningham, whether it's the funeral home, whether it's a life celebrant. It could be all these different pieces. Okay. So social workers do a couple things, right? So emotional support, which social workers are therapists in training. I mean, some of them already have their clinical license, but many of them, which was what I was working on, my clinical license. So you're an LMSW, you're a licensed master social worker working on your clinical license. And when you have your clinical license, you're a therapist and you go in private practice. So we have the groundwork and the training of a therapist. Okay. That's one part of what we do. And we help with concrete benefits, Medicare, Medicaid. Are you a veteran? Are there things that we could help you with? We help people understand that for Social Security, you get paid back. It used to be $400 after the person dies for the funeral. You don't get it before. So concrete benefits, paperwork. Sometimes this is home care. We would connect people to home care. We would connect people to private hire aides. Now death doulas have kind of moved into that same space, but connecting people to resources. I will say that I was like a Rolodex. People would come to me and say, Carolyn, didn't you have the name and number for a visiting dentist or someone to come to the home to do, I had someone who would help with when someone was dying, pets, and, where could a dog go? Where could a cat, all these kinds of things. Elder care lawyers, lots of resources. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But social workers do concrete benefits and resources. Okay. And advocacy. We would do some advocacy. Some social workers are community organizers, not hospice, and do a lot of advocacy, but we have basic training. So some of the advocacy could be with housing. We had to get involved in housing, with home care sometimes. Sometimes we had to do some advocacy. We had patients who lived in skilled nursing facilities, and we'd have to advocate with within the skilled nursing facility. So advocacy was sometimes a piece of it as well. So the interdisciplinary team, I can't emphasize this enough. All folks who work with people at end of life can and should have compassion, right? We want to bring love and compassion. However, not everybody has a clinical skill set, and not everybody has the same clinical skill set. It's really important that we work together as a team and recognize, hey, this is my thing, but I got to call Jane, the nurse. Hey, this is my thing. Oh, Anna's amazing. She's an amazing spiritual care counselor. She'd be really good at this. So we really work together to meet people's needs. This is really important. I'm hearing a lot these days of people who are like, I come in and do everything. So no, you don't. Not only do you not have the training, but nobody does. Nobody does. We learn, we share information, and this benefits our patients and caregivers. I've had some amazing experiences in hospice. I remember when I first started in hospice, I went into the home, and there were Carmeline. Oh my gosh, am I saying this right? Carmelita, these nuns, these like amazing nuns were in the home. The patient was dying. And I got to like observe this like beautiful and amazing ceremony. I've been privileged to see that in many ways, but I'm not a spiritual care counselor. I'm not. I'm compassionate. I'm caring. I love work my clients and my patients. I'm there for you. I'm not a spiritual care counselor. I did a lot of joint visits with our spiritual care counselor, Anna, who is a guest on my podcast a lot. We actually became really good friends. And I do think we were a good team, but it's the strength of the team. And this is really, really important. Okay. So social work is community-based work, especially in hospice. And this is really important. So social workers have their catchment area. For example, I was on the Brooklyn West team. There were 3 teams in Brooklyn. Okay. Each team, so you have your mini team, your nurse, your social worker, your doctor, your nurse practitioner, your team manager, and then you'll pull in your spiritual care counselor, volunteer. Okay. And then the family and the home care. Okay. But then that team is on a bigger team. So our team had 2 full-time social workers and 1 part-time, many nurses. I don't even remember how many, because the nurses have a smaller catchment area. We did just have 1 chaplain for our whole team. So we worked on a bigger team, and then Brooklyn had 3 teams. So in total, there were like 9 social workers, and we could all collaborate and help each other. And we helped with community resources. So this is really important. So in the community, it could be we knew where the Medicaid office was. It could be that we had to do advocacy work. It could be that we knew an elder care lawyer in the neighborhood. I want to give another example. So let's say, we were on a thread of all the social workers. So let's say a social worker, Kim, sent in a text or an email. Hey, such and such nurse, funeral home used to be great. What happened? A client just had a terrible experience. And then someone else texts, yeah, a client just said the same thing to me. And then the third social worker is like, oh, don't you remember the main director of the funeral home is on maternity leave, or I don't know what, but it could be something, but we share information. And so it benefits the patients, it benefits our clients, our caregivers. Or someone could ask a question and the person could be like, the social worker might be like, I don't know. And then we text one of the other, hey, do you know about this? Do you know about these kinds of things? Okay. So really important. So you have your area, community-based. This could cover many things in order to meet the needs of the family. Okay. One thing I do want to go back and say, and we're just going to go back for a minute to going back to spiritual. I just want to add that some people, certainly our Black folks, but a lot of people would say they have a church family, right? And so some of these strengths were both spiritual and religious and social. It was also your community, right? So we really recognize this within culture, within socioeconomic, within gender. We really have to work with people really specifically to really listen to what their strengths are and what's really working for them and supporting them. Okay, so that was the last piece I wanted to add. So thank you for listening. And I think I covered DNR, healthcare proxies. I think I said that right. That the social worker is the one who fills out the most forms, right? And I think I had mentioned I've done hundreds of most forms, DNR, healthcare proxy forms, and we have specific training for this and how to have a conversation with people in order to meet these needs, in order to understand what is important to them, what is going to support and scaffold them, and it's across. We work with many different people, so they have very different needs. Okay. So I just want to say that. I'm going to end with one other thing. I've worked with veterans. I've worked with some POWs. I've worked with Holocaust survivors. I've worked with some people who've had a lot of trauma in their life. And one thing that I have noticed is that they often want to have control and they want privacy, right? So it may be different than other people who want their family and they want this and they want, aides or death doulas, or some people don't want that. Okay. So this is an example of how we really need to work with people specifically for their needs. And I really want people to take that away. Okay. So, oops, I should have, I want to stop screen share. Thank you so much for joining me. Please, comments, questions. Did I leave something out? Did I forget something? Is it unclear? Would you like me to add something? Please let me know. I want this to be a collaborative effort. I want to build a community, and I really want to get the information out there. Thank you so much for listening, and please subscribe.